Corey Harrison, a familiar face from the show Pawn Stars, stunned the entire courtroom when he suddenly collapsed, unable to hold back his tears of pain. Before him was not only the doc, but also the harsh truth about his father, Rick Harrison, and his longtime friend Chumley, the people who built the most famous pawn empire in America with him. Now, all three were caught up in a series of serious accusations, causing them to face a storm of public opinion and shocking the public. The image of Corey choking in silence, standing before the tense gaze of the entire audience, not only shook fans but also opened up a deep tragedy behind the halo and reputation of the Harrison family. This is not just the story of a hit TV show, but also the broken trust, family love, and a legacy that they worked so hard to build. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent, so quiet that every little sound was clear. You could hear a pin drop. No one dared to move, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the worst to come. And then, the judge's cold voice cut through the tense atmosphere, announcing the verdict. Rick Harrison, who had been associated with a beloved TV show for more than a decade, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Silence filled the room, not a whisper. Suddenly, a hoarse, choked sound rang out from the back row. It was the uncontrollable sobbing of Rick's son, Corey Harrison. His face, once the familiar symbol of the show, was now contorted with pain. His legs were shaking. One hand clutched a crumpled tissue, the other covered his mouth, as if trying to swallow the soundless screams. The pain did not stop there. While the echoes of the first sentence had not yet subsided, the court continued to announce the second sentence. Austin Lee Russell, also known as Chumley, a close friend of the family, was also sentenced to life in prison. The whole room suddenly stopped breathing. A gasp of surprise rang out, like a wave of horror spreading from the center. Everyone could only put their hands to their mouths, shaking their heads, unable to believe their eyes. The faces that the audience had once loved were now facing the most painful and cruel truth. In the midst of that confusion and shock, Corey Harrison could not stand firm. He collapsed in the arms of his family, his eyes red with tears, his shoulders shaking from the great shock. A moment so painful, so real, that even the longtime reporters had to stop taking pictures. It was no longer a TV show, no longer beloved characters, only pain and the collapse of an empire they had once built. What shocked the public was not just the harsh sentence. It was also the sense of betrayal, when serious crimes such as money laundering and human trafficking tore apart their beautiful image. Asterisk Pawn Stars. Asterisk was more than a TV show. It was a memory, a symbol of family love and passion for history. From a small pawn shop in Las Vegas, they became a global phenomenon. And now, it was all gone, leaving the public with a lingering question. Why didn't we notice sooner? Rick Harrison, a man admired for his sharp intellect, tenacity, and passion for history, has been a Pawn Stars icon for years. By his side is Corey, a strong yet rebellious son who holds a deep love for his family. And of course, Chumley, a clumsy and humorous young man who has made millions of viewers laugh with his charming innocence. They are not only a great team on screen, but also a television family that is loved and trusted by the whole world. However, what was once their pride is now crumbling piece by piece, not only because of the harsh sentences, but also because of the shocking truth that has torn apart the public's trust in them. Behind the friendly smiles and friendly image, there are dark corners that have never been revealed. Empty promises to young girls, shady money transferred across borders, and secret transactions taking place right in the shop that was once considered sacred for history enthusiasts and collectors. Everything was perfectly hidden, no one suspected, until a brave woman spoke up. Having been close to Rick Harrison, she had witnessed too many irregularities that were previously only vague signs. But when put together, everything became clearer than ever. She not only gave testimony, but also brought with her evidence that could shake the whole system. She recounted that Rick had no remorse. On the contrary, he was proud of what he had done. During a night of heavy drinking, he said, "I am untouchable. The camera only records what I want people to see." That seemingly innocuous remark was the key. From the mysterious late-night text messages to the unexplained trips, from the unexplained cash to the increasingly cold demeanor, the woman had been quietly gathering the pieces. And then she decided to act. Her courage exposed a world of elaborate deception. Early on the morning of March 14th, a team of federal agents suddenly burst into Rick Harrison's home. There were no more smiles for the cameras, no more familiar hearty laughter. There was only the heavy silence of a meticulously planned raid. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a dream destination for history buffs, was completely sealed off. Armored vehicles surrounded the area, agents spread out across the area, and media helicopters circled overhead like hawks. Rick and Austin "Chumlee" Russell were arrested that same morning. During the search, authorities discovered a series of sophisticated encryption devices, large amounts of cash of unknown origin, fake passports, suspicious employment contracts, and a hard drive containing serious information related to controlling and intimidating behavior. While everything was falling apart, only one person was still unable to accept the truth: Corey Harrison. Standing in the midst of the chaos, his eyes were bewildered, as if the world he once believed in had crumbled right under his feet. Corey Harrison, son of an icon, unintended heir, and witness to an unexpected crisis. In the shocking trial, he was no longer the brash, confident son he usually was. Instead, he was a weary man, his voice trembling as he struggled to choose between truth and loyalty. "I was just a son. I wanted to believe that my father was a good man," Corey choked out before the jury. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blame. There was only a heavy silence as he tried to piece together memories, missed conversations, unexplained trips, vague signs he had previously dismissed as insignificant. Perhaps sin sometimes lies not in the act, but in the silence, in turning a blind eye, pretending not to see, not to hear, not to know. This story is important because it reveals the dark side of the worship of fame. In an age where a TV show can turn an ordinary person into a national icon, we sometimes forget that the spotlight can also obscure the truth. Rick Harrison was once seen as the epitome of knowledge, history, and perseverance, a man with a deep love for old things, stories from the past. But that image, or at least the image built around it, hid something no one expected. When the truth gradually emerged, it not only shattered his image as a father, a boss, a TV star, but also made a generation of viewers wonder, do we really know the man behind the smile? During Pawn Stars, how many people laughed at Chumlee's naivety, admired Rick's wit, and admired Corey's loyalty? But while the world is captivated by the rare items and the witty negotiations, there are victims who suffer in silence. They don't speak out because they are afraid, because they are controlled, and because they know no one will believe them. This is no longer a story about a family or a TV show. It is a story about the price of silence, about slow justice, and about how a brand can hide the darkest things. To understand this story, we have to go back to the beginning, not to the bright lights, but to the dusty early days of the business. In the early 1980s, in the middle of the alluring city of Las Vegas, Richard Benjamin Harrison, who would later be known as the Old Man, and his family started from scratch. There was no media strategy, no sponsors, just a belief in hard work and business. In 1989, the gold and silver pawn shop was officially born. Rick Harrison was a young man full of ambition, but he also began to see opportunities beyond the walls of his small pawn shop. He realized that every item had a story, and that what attracted people was not just its material value, but the memories and history attached to it. While others saw an old item, Rick saw a chapter in someone's life. With that intuition, he built a personal brand, a combination of historical knowledge, sharp negotiating skills, and charisma on camera. With the support of Corey and Chumley, the show Pawn Stars was born, a turning point that turned the small pawn shop into an iconic location and turned them into a famous family. However, when the screen went off and the audience turned their backs, what happened behind the scenes was never made public. No one knows about the shady dealings, the secrets that never aired, and the decisions where morality no longer played a role. And now, with the spotlight turned off, Corey is left alone, a man caught between two worlds, one filled with memories of his family, the other with the truth he must face. In silence, he begins to piece together the final pieces of a story that was once built on trust. Despite countless rejections, Rick Harrison never gave up. He persistently knocked on the doors of every producer and every TV station with a strong belief that his idea deserved to be heard. Finally, in 2009, his persistence paid off when the History Channel decided to give him a chance. A brand new reality TV show was born, Pawn Stars. At that time, no one expected much from a show revolving around a pawn shop, because it sounded boring and difficult to attract attention among a series of other TV giants. But what happened next surprised everyone. After just a few episodes, the audience was captivated by the unique combination of knowledge, personality, and humor of the four in the shop. Rick, with a sharp and slightly rough appearance, young and outspoken Corey, naive but cute Chumley, and old man Harrison, a calm, strict, but warm father. They don't just sell antiques, they tell vivid stories. Each item is a slice of history. Each transaction is an interesting little lesson. The show not only took television by storm, but also quickly spread on social networks, attracting audiences of all ages and classes. From an ordinary pawn shop in the desert of Las Vegas, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop quickly became a famous global destination. People lined up every day just to enter the place that was so familiar on the small screen, to take pictures with the family members on the show. Rick became an icon of reality TV, not because of the glitz, but because of his deep knowledge and captivating storytelling ability. He not only saw the material value, but also aroused the emotions attached to each item that the customer brought. Corey, from a guy behind the counter, became a star. His straightforward, sometimes stubborn demeanor created a unique mark that made him both admired and approachable. Chumley, who started out as an assistant, won the hearts of viewers with his clumsiness and natural humor. He became the lovable fool, an indispensable part of the show's success. They were no longer just pawnbrokers. They became part of popular culture. The line between real people and their TV image became increasingly blurred. Along with their popularity, countless new business opportunities arose. Rick wrote books, gave speeches, opened restaurants, and collaborated with major brands. Chumley launched his own product line and opened a candy store. Corey enjoyed the life of a real star, attending red carpet events and traveling in luxury. Their success was not measured by viewership ratings or TV revenue alone. Every day, hundreds of tourists flocked to the pawnbroker, shopping, getting autographs, taking pictures, and bringing home souvenirs. Some days, the store's revenue reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, a figure few could have imagined when they first started. The Harrison family's Las Vegas dream not only came true, but far exceeded all expectations. Behind the scenes, Rick Harrison was in control. He oversaw every employee, ran the show, handled the finances. No detail escaped his notice. While Chumley played the goofball, smiling on camera, Rick was quietly calculating, strategizing, and constantly looking for ways to expand his empire. For years, everything seemed to run smoothly, as if it couldn't be more perfect. But that perfection was just a facade, and over time, cracks began to appear. Rumors quietly circulated among the staff. Whispers of missing items, off-the-books deals, deals made behind closed doors. But no one really listened. When the show was still drawing millions of viewers and Rick was an icon in the public eye, the truth, no matter how questionable, was considered a nuisance. It's easier for people to accept a beautiful dream than to face the dark side of reality. Corey was in that cycle. He trusted his father, Chumley, the people who had been with him throughout his entire adult life. Corey didn't ask questions, didn't doubt, didn't seek to understand the reasons behind what happened behind the scenes. For him, if everything was still operating normally, there was nothing to worry about. But not everyone ignored it. Over time, some former employees began to speak up. They told of shady spots in the accounting system, of strange customers who had never appeared on television, of how everything was staged to hide things that were inconvenient to make public. However, evidence was hard to find. Accusations were seen as jealousy, as bitterness for failure. Those who wanted to discover the truth gradually disappeared in silence, without any explanation. Meanwhile, Pawn Stars continued to grow, new seasons were airing, merchandising deals were signed, spin-offs and documentaries were coming out. Rick's image, smart, gruff, yet charming, was etched in the minds of audiences. Corey became the calm, thoughtful son, Chumley the funny, naive, and lovable character. But behind the bright lights of television, another story was slowly taking shape, quiet, complicated, and dangerous. Their journey to the top was once as bright as a shooting star, but each step higher revealed a more fragile foundation. While the rest of America sat in front of the screen, corn in hand, believing that what they saw was true, behind the scenes, Rick and his associates ran the business in a way that no one was allowed to witness. There were no cameras when the most important deals were made, the deals that would later bury them all. And then, as the veil of illusion slowly collapsed, Corey, the once silent and trusting son, was the first to face the most difficult choice of his life, to remain loyal or to face the truth. He chose the truth. A right but painful decision. The price he had to pay broke him deep down, before the cold lock rang, before the lights of the courtroom obscured the face once loved by the whole country. Rick Harrison. From a beloved businessman, Rick Harrison gradually became an unexpected villain. His downfall began not with sensational news reports or noisy investigations, but with strange looks during night shifts or casual comments over beers after work. They were vague warnings, easily dismissed because they did not fit the image the public had been led to believe. A close-knit father who loved history, ran a popular pawn shop, and had a television show watched by millions. How could that image hide something dark? But the truth, as always, came uninvited. It seeped through the small cracks in the perfect shell, slowly peeling away the mask that had been carefully painted over hundreds of episodes of television. Those who worked at Gold and Silver Pawn before the show became famous still remember a very different Rick Harrison. He wasn't evil, but he was obsessed with power and control. He wanted to win every deal and never let anything get out of hand. When the cameras came out, Rick was no longer the same guy who was slogging through the items. He started to act overly confident, as if no one could touch him. Corey noticed the change, but he said nothing. Some days, Rick seemed to live in a world of his own, both emotionally and physically distant. Deals began to happen out of the camera's view. Not all of them were unusual, but some were clearly off. Cash changed hands without receipts. Customers who avoided the cameras were invited into private rooms and mysteriously disappeared. No one questioned anything because everything was running smoothly. The show continued to do well. The store was always busy. Chumley became a phenomenon, and Corey was busy with events. But there are small details that don't add up. An inventory clerk who suddenly disappeared without a word once joked that Rick's safe contained more than ancient coins. She was never found, and then everyone forgot about it. A tech hired to upgrade the security system once revealed that there were intentional blind spots in the system, areas where the cameras kept losing signal. When he questioned him, Rick would simply reply, "Fix what I told you to fix," and then terminate the contract. Some female customers also had questionable experiences. One young woman said she was invited to a VIP party after closing time, only to find herself ushered into a private office with Rick and Chumlee. She wasn't detained, but the unpleasant feeling haunted her forever. Such stories circulated in the dark through private messages without any public evidence. Everyone wanted to believe they were just baseless rumors. A former producer who was fired revealed that Rick always insisted on control of the final cut, not just to shape the content, but to remove any moments that might be offensive. A permanently deleted scene once featured Rick asking a teenage girl about an item she was selling. The way he looked, the tone of his voice, sent shivers down the spine of the crew. But no one reported it. No one spoke up. The scene never aired. Then came the strange real estate deals. Rick began buying up homes around Las Vegas through shell companies and offshore accounts. Some of the homes were virtually empty, but neighbors would regularly see young women coming in and out. Someone heard screaming in the middle of the night, called the police, but no charges were filed. The woman never showed up again. These stories were not reported when they happened. No questions were asked. All were hidden under a cloak of fame and admiration. But the truth never disappears. It just waits for the right moment to rise to the surface. And when it does, it takes everything with it. Corey found himself isolated, caught up in a never-ending cycle of business travel, contract management, branding, filming episodes, partying, and enjoying the fame of being part of an American television empire. He had always trusted his father and Chumlee, but that trust was not unconditional. When things started to go wrong, Corey felt uneasy. It wasn't one big event, but a series of small details. His father paying for unnecessary items in cash, strangers showing up at family parties without anyone knowing who they were. Chumlee became withdrawn, reckless, and sometimes violent. Then there were the financial problems. In 2021, Corey's accountant discovered a nearly $600,000 shortfall in the business account over a 6-month period, with no paperwork to explain it. When Corey confronted Rick about this one weekend morning, Rick simply laughed and said it was diversification, then quickly changed the subject when Corey pressed for more details. But there was one moment Corey never talked about publicly, a detail he alluded to in court but never fully explained. When the judge asked when Corey first began to suspect something was wrong, he paused and replied, "One night at the store after work, I saw something I shouldn't have seen." When pressed further, Corey shook his head and said, "I don't want to talk about it." But that moment changed the way he viewed his father. It was the beginning of the end. Corey was in no rush to leave the company, but he was changed inside. He began digging into the books, observing more closely, listening to conversations he had previously missed. What he discovered over the next year shocked him. When the FBI came knocking, Corey wasn't surprised. He was heartbroken, but he had known. The whispers he'd once ignored became screams he couldn't ignore. The signs he'd once ignored, the warnings he'd dismissed, all became stark evidence of the price of indifference. The woman who eventually becomes the key witness in Rick Harrison's case had no intention of exposing him from the start. When she entered Rick's world, she saw only a charming, confident, successful man with extensive connections and an irresistible charm. But beneath that flashy facade, she gradually realized that his nature was different. Ruthless coldness, arrogant pride qualities that could destroy anyone with a conscience. Their relationship began with a chance meeting in Las Vegas, then gradually became a business partnership before becoming more intimate. She was more than just a fan. With a background in marketing and collecting, she caught Rick's attention. Gradually, he drew her into his world, sometimes as a late-night confidant, sometimes as an unofficial assistant, and sometimes as a go-to person when the lights went out and public image didn't matter. One night, with a glass of bourbon in his hand and looking particularly excited, he told her something she would never forget. Not a confession, but a boast. According to his later testimony, Rick leaned in close to her and said, "I have a side business that the TV stations will never understand. I've built an empire, not just in this pawn shop, but outside, with real money, and it never gets on camera. At first, she thought he was just bragging. Maybe he'd had too much to drink. But Rick kept going, talking about properties bought under false pretenses, deals that took place outside the official system, and relationships deep enough to make him virtually untouchable. He wanted me to understand that he had power, that he could get away with anything, she later recalled. She told herself that perhaps she was overthinking things, but over time the inescapable irregularities began to become more apparent. The late-night calls, the unexplained trips, the envelopes stuffed with cash, and the appearance of young women, sometimes very young, who frequented Rick's office after hours. Once she found a girl crying, her eyes red. When she asked, Rick always had a way of making her feel silly for doubting him. "You don't understand the world I run in," he would say. She wanted to trust him, because trusting meant not having to face the terrifying truth that the man she saw might be a real danger. One night, she decided to make a surprise visit to the private home that Rick had once called a place to get away from work. But when she entered, she sensed something was wrong. Cameras were pointed at the bedrooms, living room, and hallway, but there were no cameras on the doors or a proper security system. The house was furnished with expensive furniture but was strangely empty. No family photos, no clothes, no trace of daily life. In a drawer, she found 6 unidentifiable phones and a series of foreign passports, mostly those of women under the age of 25. That night, she left in silence, certain that she could no longer remain silent. She turned over everything she had found to the authorities and became a key witness in a federal investigation in which the FBI had been monitoring Rick Harrison for more than a year. Her testimony marked the turning point in the investigation, opening the door to the full investigation the FBI had long been waiting for. A credible first-hand witness with irrefutable physical evidence. The investigation quickly escalated into a full-blown operation. Undercover agents infiltrated the pawn shop, surveillance was deployed everywhere, phone records were searched, and finances were scrutinized. As the agents dug deeper, they discovered that Rick Harrison was not only involved in illegal dealings, but also running a human trafficking network. He used his celebrity status to cover up his crimes, luring young women, promising them modeling jobs, antiques appraisals, and television appearances, many of whom mysteriously disappeared. A complex money laundering system also emerged, involving offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, and a network of LLCs that spanned the United States. Chum-Lee was not just a bystander, but sometimes a recruiter or enforcer, always close enough to assist Rick, but far enough away to deny any connection. The whistleblower was the one who set the course for the investigation. Although she initially disbelieved Rick's boasts about his powerful connections in politics and law, she was gradually overcome by the fear of what might happen when she confronted a powerful figure like him. She changed her phone number, moved to a new place, and checked her locks every night, living in a constant state of anxiety. She feared not just Rick, but what would happen if the story broke and a public figure like him was exposed. When the story was finally made public, she found herself in a cheap hotel in Arizona, filled with anxiety. But when she learned of Rick and Chumlee's arrest, she wept not for victory but for the lives destroyed and the women hurt. Her identity was protected, referred to only by a safe name. Without her, the truth would have remained buried. Her courage was a confession, a voice from the shadows, a revelation of Rick's true nature, not for what he had done, but for the arrogant self-satisfaction he displayed. It was that self-satisfaction that haunted her, because in Rick's eyes it was not a crime but a triumph, proof that he had deceived the world, until it all came crashing down. On a crisp Tuesday morning in Las Vegas, as the sun rose and the streets were bathed in neon, the city's silence was torn apart. Black SUVs without license plates rolled around the corner, FBI agents pouring out with the precision of trained men. One group headed toward the back of the store, another toward the main entrance of the gold and silver pawn shop, the most famous pawn shop in America. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no fanfare, just the end. Inside, Rick Harrison was checking out supplies with an employee, while Chumlee ate a burrito in the break room, occasionally skimming his cryptocurrency wallet. Corey Harrison was absent, attending a charity event in California, an absence that would later prove to be fortunate, as he had avoided the approaching storm. At 7:36 a.m., the raid began. Each employee was told to turn in their phones and remain calm. While no one understood what was going on, the intense gazes of the agents made it clear that this was more than just a tax audit. They held thick documents, signed by a federal judge, and serious charges of human trafficking, extortion, child exploitation, and large-scale money laundering. If you found this story interesting and want to learn more, be sure to like, share the video, and leave a comment below to let us know what you think. Rick demanded to see a lawyer immediately, while Chumlee tried to break the tension with a joke, but no one was in the mood to listen. The pawn shop, once a popular place for historical artifacts and strange collectibles, was now filled with federal agents working tirelessly. Every drawer was searched, every safe was broken open, and every hidden room was explored. The agents were well prepared because they knew exactly what to look for. In the basement, which the public had never been allowed to enter, there was a hidden steel door disguised as a back wall. After opening the door, they discovered a digital archive with servers, laptops, external hard drives, surveillance monitors, foreign language documents, contracts, and a list of dozens of women's names, some aliases, others with no records in any public database, along with the shocking videos which were later sealed and banned by the court. They showed young women in distress, held in rooms identical to those in Rick's outside possessions, with timestamps and audio recordings. The evidence was undeniable. Upstairs in the office where Rick worked every day, investigators found more evidence. Stacks of cash hidden behind bookshelves under the floor in the hollowed-out interiors of antiques. One employee counted more than $240,000 in cash, each stamped and dated, along with burner phones, fake IDs, international wire transfer receipts, and coded lists of foreign transactions. In Chumlee's desk drawer, they found photos of women in various states of being, some apparently unconscious. These were hard copies, not digital files, with dates on the back. When questioned, Chumlee would only say it was party souvenirs, but investigators took it as evidence of serious predatory behavior. The raid lasted nearly 6 hours. As the media began to notice something was amiss, the pawn shop's facade was sealed with yellow tape. News vans began to arrive, reporters scrambled for positions, and helicopters hovered overhead to record the scene. Crowds began to gather, local fans, curious tourists, in disbelief. They thought it might be a prank, maybe a TV show, since Rick and Chumlee were celebrities. Surely it was some kind of publicity stunt or stunt. But all doubts were gone when agents led Rick and Chumlee out, handcuffed and expressionless, and put them in separate SUVs. It was then that it hit everyone. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a special. This was the truth. And in that moment, as the SUV carrying Rick and Chumlee drove away, an eerie silence fell across the Las Vegas Strip. No one spoke. Only the sound of cameras tearing through the air and neon lights shining down on faces. A story few believed to be true had been revealed, not just a case, but the lives that had been crushed, the people who had been exploited in the shadows, and the permanent change of a city of lights. That same day, FBI spokesperson Karen Mendoza held a major press conference, announcing that the agency had uncovered evidence linking Richard Harrison and Austin Russell to a serious criminal network that included the exploitation and trafficking of young women across state lines, along with illegal money laundering through international and domestic financial networks. However, she declined to answer any specific questions about the case. The following morning, formal charges were announced along with an 84-page indictment. Rick Harrison faced 17 federal charges, including fraud, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Austin Chumley Russell was charged with 13 counts, including destroying evidence and aiding in a criminal conspiracy. The indictment described a nearly decade-long multi-state criminal network that involved dozens of women being exploited and trafficked across national borders. The women were deceived with promises of modeling opportunities, business partnerships, or television appearances before being manipulated, threatened, or coerced into silence. The proceeds of these crimes were funneled through shell companies linked to offshore cryptocurrency wallets. Investigators also discovered more than $7.8 million in suspicious transactions, all conducted in Rick's name. The public reaction was swift and strong. The Pawn Stars show was severely affected, with the network pulling all reruns, Rick's public events being canceled, bookstores pulling his memoirs from shelves, endorsement deals being canceled, and Chumley's products being taken off the shelves in a matter of hours. Chumley's candy store was closed, and his social media accounts were suspended. Meanwhile, Rick's son, Corey Harrison, flew back to Las Vegas that same day. When the plane landed, he was met by the FBI. Agents informed him of the situation with his father and Chumley. A source said that upon hearing the news, Corey slumped into his seat at the airport and was silent for 20 minutes. Finally, he uttered a single sentence. What did they find? Although he had suspected something was amiss for some time, nothing could have prepared him for the scale and severity of the incident. No one could have imagined that behind the walls of the gold and silver pawn shop where he grew up, such a terrible crime lay. The shop's windows were boarded up, the locks had been changed, and his family's legacy was shattered. What had once been a cultural icon, a beacon of American resilience and charm, was now a cautionary tale of the dark truths hidden behind the glamour and fame. The raid was just the beginning, and now the world would watch the trial. The victim spoke, and the evidence was presented in a packed courtroom. Journalists, activists, and former fans of Rick and Chumley were all present. In the crowd, Corey Harrison was confronted with a truth too devastating to ignore. A man caught between his family and justice, and he couldn't turn away. Everything had fallen apart, and now the world would see what was left. The trial was held at the Clark County Courthouse, which had become a fortress with protective barriers along the sidewalks. Cameras were mounted on every pole. Reporters with microphones stood next to satellite trucks ready to report live. Helicopters hovered above, recording the chaos below. People lined the sidewalks as if they were waiting for tickets to a concert, not to witness a major trial. But for them, this was more than just a trial. This was the downfall of the men they once idolized, a shock not only to the entertainment industry, but also to those who once loved them. Rick Harrison and Austin Chumley Russell, characters from the popular show Pawn Stars, entered the courtroom in orange prison jumpsuits, shackled feet, and sad expressions. They were no longer the familiar, smiling, friendly faces, but now the images of criminals facing their responsibilities. Their hair was disheveled, not only from the shackles, but also from the weight of what was to come. The courtroom was heavily guarded, with only a handful of reporters, lawyers, and victims present. However, the events of this trial could not be kept secret, and information quickly spread around the world. This was not just an ordinary trial, but a landmark event. Judge Naomi Richter, who presided over the trial, was known for her strictness and meticulous attention to detail. She has handled high-profile cases involving gangs and political scandals, but even she could not help but notice the importance of this case. As the trial began, federal prosecutor Elena Marquez immediately set the tone, insisting that this was not a case about celebrities or television. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a story about the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people, hidden behind a facade of fame and fortune. The defendants used their reputation and image to build trust, then betrayed that trust. The prosecutor went on to detail a criminal operation that spanned nearly a decade. During this time, Rick Harrison and Austin Russell orchestrated a human trafficking ring disguised as a well-known pawn shop. Young women were lured with false promises of opportunities to appear on television shows, work in the entertainment industry, or attend speaking events. Some were filmed and appeared on television, while others disappeared, never to be seen again. For the defense, attorney Wallace Mendez, representing Rick Harrison, disputed all allegations, asserting that Rick was a businessman, a father, and a popular television personality, not a predator. Mendez argued that the testimony from witnesses was unreliable and was being used to smear a man who had contributed greatly to society through educational and entertaining programs. Meanwhile, attorney Jasmine Kerr, representing Chumley, argued that her client was a follower, not a mastermind. Kerr suggested that Chumley was either naive or too dependent on Rick to realize the seriousness of what was happening. The trial was becoming increasingly tense. Everyone realized that this was not just a legal argument, but a confrontation between reputation and truth, between admiration and betrayal. This was a defining moment for the fate of men who had once been icons in the public eye, now facing the consequences of actions they could no longer deny. The defense of Rick Harrison and Chumley began to unravel as soon as the prosecutor called their first witness, Maya, into the courtroom. The 19-year-old was a devoted Pawn Stars fan and Las Vegas local. Maya said it was Rick Harrison who gave her the opportunity to model for a vintage jewelry ad, a longtime dream. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Maya's testimony brought the courtroom to a standstill. She described in detail what had happened to her life, as she was lied to and taken advantage of. She was forced to sign contracts she didn't understand, asked to move between Rick's properties without her consent, and even filmed without her notice. When she exclaimed, "I thought he was helping me, but he sold me," the courtroom fell into a deafening silence, and the audience could feel the pain and fear in her every word. Immediately, the defense attempted to discredit Maya. They pointed out discrepancies in her story and used social media photos of her laughing happily next to Rick. They questioned her about the possibility that she might be making up stories to gain attention. However, Maya was unmoved. She was not the only witness. 3 other women took the stand, each with similar stories of being seduced and exploited. Their testimony further pointed to Chumley's involvement in the recruitment process. At times, Chumley was portrayed as a bystander, but at other times he was accused of locking a girl in a room when she refused to follow his orders. The next piece of evidence was presented by the FBI, with digital data seized. A hard drive recovered from a secret room in Rick's basement contained thousands of files of images, videos, financial records, and emails. The videos shown to the jury showed Rick discussing transactions with women, including the transfer of money through shady accounts. Meanwhile, audio from a recording showed Chumley's voice involved in organizing routes and stops in the operation. The evidence was clear and undeniable. The most conclusive evidence, however, came from Rick Harrison himself. A recording was discovered in a secure folder called X Secure 2020 on his phone. In the recording, Rick can be heard talking to an anonymous associate saying, "We'll protect them. They'll never find out, not with a camera pointed at each other." When this sound was played, the atmosphere in the courtroom immediately became tense. Some members of the jury changed their expressions. A woman in the courtroom gasped. Another quickly wiped away tears. Everything suddenly became clearer than ever. Guilt was no longer a hypothesis, but an undeniable fact. Rick's defense team immediately objected, claiming that the recording could have been faked. However, forensic analysis confirmed the authenticity of the recording, with the background noises matching the surroundings of Rick's house. This evidence made the case increasingly clear, and the defendant's crimes seemed undeniable. The courtroom fell silent as Corey Harrison took the stand, not the confident, proud image he had portrayed on television. He wore a dark gray suit, his eyes heavy, his face pale. Gone was the arrogance. Gone were the familiar sunglasses. Instead, he looked like a man burdened with great anxiety about what he was facing. Corey was sworn in, and when asked if he understood the consequences of bearing false witness, he replied softly but firmly, "I love my dad." But that love, he admitted, was no excuse for what had happened. Corey began to recount the strange things he had witnessed over the years: missing money, shady deals, secret meetings with people who were not clients or partners. But what hit him hardest was when he opened a secret drawer in his father's office one night and found a ledger with lists of names, dates, and codes he couldn't understand. When he asked Rick about it the next morning, all he got was a cold reply: "Don't mess with things that aren't yours." It was a defining moment, the moment Corey knew something was wrong, but he was too scared to continue investigating. Corey continued to testify, sharing that he stopped asking questions after that, afraid of the answers he might get. He expressed his pain at not speaking up sooner, and his decision to cooperate with the FBI after the arrests had been made. As the jury looked at the photos the prosecutor presented, some of them of victims he recognized, including a girl he remembered vividly who had come to the store hoping to get involved again. Corey stared at the photo for 30 seconds, then, unable to contain his emotions, he burst into tears. "I saw her. I missed her. She just wanted to learn. I didn't know they would do this to her." The courtroom was silent. Reporters bowed their heads. No one dared to breathe. Everyone felt the weight of what they had just witnessed. Corey apologized for not keeping his cool, but he continued his testimony. He described the process of realizing his guilt for not acting sooner and how he would live with the pain every day. "I wish I could say I had the courage to stop, but the truth is, I was too scared," he finished, his voice ringing like a bell signaling the end of the courtroom. That day, no one in the courtroom applauded or cheered. There was no music, no commercial breaks, just the painful, cruel reality. The defense did not question Corey for long, knowing that his pain was real and undeniable. His testimony was credible and irrefutable, and his shame was undeniable. As the trial continued, the evidence slowly trickled in. Each day, more victims came forward, bank statements and forensic evidence were presented, making the atmosphere in the courtroom more and more tense. Rick and Chumley sat silently, no outbursts, no apologies or explanations. All eyes were on them. As the trial drew to a close, one thing became clear. This was not just a case of two men, but a story of power abuse, of how far those who thought themselves untouchable could go. And now, their time was up. Over the years, Austin Lee Russell, better known as Chumley, has become a staple of the Pawn Stars comedy scene. He provides laughs with his haggling, from negotiating the price of an old guitar to forgeries. But behind the show's flashy facade, Chumley's real life hides a different story. One day, a woman visits one of Rick's hideaways, a house he often describes as a quiet retreat from the hustle and bustle. But when she walks in, she immediately senses something is wrong. The house is too clean, too empty, like a stage without actors, ready for a performance, but no one is coming. She began to notice strange details. There was no sign of real life, no toothbrush, no bottle of cleanser, no personal photos. Everything was arranged too perfectly, like a scene from a movie with no one in it. She noticed a small table beside the bed with 6 cell phones, all turned off, without cases or labels. Though they came from different manufacturers, they all had one thing in common. They left no trace. Next to the phones was a stack of foreign passports, neatly arranged like medical records in a private clinic. The passports belonged to women from a variety of countries, mostly Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, with a few from South America. The faces in the photos had been full of life, but now they were just cold memories, trapped in emotionless pages. She did not panic, nor did she cry for help. She walked out of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't sleep all night, and then she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. She turned over everything she found to the authorities, asking for nothing, no lawyers, no bargaining, just the truth. It was that truth that made her a key witness in a federal investigation that had been based on vague rumors and vague emails buried in online forums. With her testimony, the investigation was dramatically accelerated. Undercover agents were placed inside the pawn shop, along with hidden cameras and listening devices. They began collecting phone records, examining financial transactions, and tracking every trace, every penny, in an effort to uncover a secret that many had tried so hard to hide. Rick Harrison is not only famous for his role as a pawn shop manager, but also as the mastermind behind a sophisticated human trafficking operation, a dark secret that few dare to believe. His fame on television has created the perfect cover, a mask to hide the dark deeds that lurk behind the pawn shop doors. The victims, girls who dream of becoming models, are deceived with promises of a better life, but in reality they become ghosts, disappearing without a trace. No one knows where they go, no messages or calls, just silence. And once they are gone, no one can find them again. The secret room that the woman discovered may be the last remaining trace of those deceived. These victims have not only lost their families, but also their right to live. They have become commodities, transported from place to place without anyone knowing. Rick, with the help of people like Chumley, continued to operate in the shadows. All his actions, whether recruiting or coercing, were carried out with the sophistication of a con artist, but the woman, the one who uncovered it all, changed everything. She was no longer just an outsider, but the only light in the darkness, the only one brave enough to speak up. Her testimony shook the system, even as she faced threats from Rick himself and those in power, people in law enforcement, politicians he could manipulate, and connections he could use to shut things down before they became a problem. She was no longer calm. The fear drove her to move, change her phone number, add 3 locks to her door, and keep her from sleeping at night. But she knew she couldn't stay silent forever. In the end, she brought the truth to light, not asking for protection or recognition, just doing the right thing. And when the truth was revealed, she felt no joy in her eyes. She only cried, not from relief, but from grief for those who had disappeared, for those who had believed the lies that television had created. Her last words became iconic. "He was not invulnerable. I was just the first one brave enough to speak out." These words shattered all illusions, ending a system that had existed for too long. The pawn shop stars were no longer the truth, only a lie. She was the first one brave enough to face it and break it. Chumley's case is special, not only because he was a comical figure on television, but also because of his important role in a sophisticated criminal network that few could have imagined. People were fooled into thinking he was just a silly, harmless laugher. However, in reality, Chumley played a key role in a game of calculation, manipulation, and deception. By playing the role of the fool so well, he kept people off guard and created a false sense of security. Meanwhile, he had too many secrets about Rick Harrison's illegal activities and contributed to maintaining this cover-up. When the accusations were made and his true role was exposed, the humor disappeared, giving way to horror. The system that Chumley and Rick had built was not a joke, but a sophisticated network of fraud and exploitation. Federal investigators uncovered chilling evidence during raids, and when they collected data from encrypted digital devices. They found a treasure trove of information, including personal records, passports, and documents belonging to more than 40 women, all of whom showed signs of being deceived, manipulated, and sold as commodities in a human trafficking scheme. The FBI's discovery uncovered one of the darkest parts of the case. It all began with a hidden safe in Rick's home, which contained folders with innocuous names but contained deeply disturbing material. Rick's notes, his tactics for recruiting and controlling his victims, along with hundreds of hours of surveillance video that Chumley and Rick had filmed, recording the victims without their consent. These recordings were not only evidence of the crimes, but also of the manipulation and control the victims endured. The case is not only an expose of a criminal network, but also a warning that seemingly ordinary people like Chumley can exploit the naivety and lack of vigilance of the community to commit evil acts. The scariest thing is that no one expected that a beloved figure like him could be involved in such a terrible crime. New evidence gathered in the case of Rick Harrison, and Chumley continues to shed light on the seriousness of the crimes the two men were involved in. One of the most notable discoveries was disposable phones, containing text messages between Rick and an international contact discussing the transport of a girl from Eastern Europe. Terms like VIP, clean record, and no paper trail suggest that this was not just a human trafficking network, but an organized system with meticulous planning from start to finish. As the investigation continued, authorities discovered Rick's luxury apartment, which contained a secret room in the basement. On the surface, the house looked normal with a swimming pool and lush gardens, but when they opened the locked door in the master closet, they discovered a completely different space. The room was designed not only to hide, but also to confine and control the victims. The walls were fitted with soundproof metal rings, and there was a security system with surveillance cameras at every corner, clearly indicating that this was a tightly controlled space intended to restrict the freedom of the abductees. Samples from the mattresses in the room showed traces of sedatives, confirming the use of drugs to reduce the victim's resistance, making them easier to manipulate. In particular, during the investigation, the authorities also discovered a series of documents in backup drives and duffel bags in Chumley's storage area. These documents were not related to the pawn shop, but were international financial transactions, including money transfers abroad through shady channels such as Bitcoin and gift cards. These transactions were not only a sign of money laundering, but also showed close links with organized crime organizations, forming a secret financial network serving illegal activities. In addition, the tapes from Chumley's home revealed many important details. The conversations between Chumley and Rick, recorded on a tape recorder hidden in Chumley's bedroom, not only exposed their business plans but also demonstrated the arrogance and overconfidence of both. Rick and Chumley discussed strategies to maintain their criminal activities and were concerned about whistleblowers. One notable quote from Rick in the recording was, "We'll be fine as long as no one tells. We've built a fortress." This statement not only reflected arrogance, but also demonstrated their belief that they could escape punishment, whether from the legal system or from anyone who intended to expose their crimes. All of these findings not only exposed a sophisticated criminal network, but also made clear the greed, insensitivity, and arrogance of those behind these activities. Rick and Chumley's actions reveal the brutality with which they manipulate and exploit innocent people and reveal the dark system they have built and concealed for so long. This evidence not only changes the course of the case, but also opens up a relentless fight against organized crime where facing justice is the only way to prevent such crimes from happening again. One of the most shocking discoveries during the investigation was a fourth property that Rick Harrison had purchased under an alias 5 years earlier. It was an industrial warehouse that did not appear in any official documents related to his pawn shop, and none of the employees, including Corey, knew of its existence. When investigators went to investigate, they found a studio fully equipped with filming equipment and lighting. More disturbingly, in a video shot there, a nearly unconscious woman was sitting on a stool, and Rick's voice could be heard clearly directing her to read words that she stuttered in fear. A family member later confirmed that the girl in the video was the one who had been reported missing. She has not been found, and the video has never been aired. It was not created for publicity purposes, but rather to demonstrate Rick's power and dominance over his victims. The video is not only a chilling testimony, but also a clear reflection of what goes on in the shadows, where there are no questions, no challenges, no excuses. The evidence does not stop there. Investigations continue to uncover the truth about the ruthless and secretive criminal world that Rick Harrison and Chumley have built over the years. One of the key witnesses who has come forward is Brent Maloney, a backroom employee at the gold and silver pawn shop for 6 years. During this time, Brent was primarily responsible for inventory management and handling high-value items, items that never appear on television. Although he was not a prominent figure, not involved in Instagram photos or media events, Brent was a keen observer and accumulated a lot of important information during his time working at the store. When called as a witness, Brent gave a very important testimony. He recounted what he had witnessed calmly and firmly. His testimony not only confirmed what the prosecutor had said, but also revealed details that had never been seen before. According to Brent, the TV show about the pawn shop was just a play. What viewers saw on TV was just a facade of the real work, which took place in the dark when the cameras were off. Valuable items and large transactions were never recorded in the official books. Rick Harrison maintained two separate accounting systems, one for public operations and one for secret transactions that only a few people had access to. Brent was responsible for recording these transactions, which never made it onto television. He recalled dozens of instances where valuable items such as antiques, weapons, foreign currencies, and rare jewelry were never recorded in the store's books. Instead, they were listed under coded items like Specials or Customer 11 and stored in a locked room in the basement. Then, over the course of several days, the items were quietly removed without anyone noticing. Brent also recounted a 17th-century dagger worth more than $80,000 that he once held, but it never made it onto television, never made it into the public eye. It was gone from storage in less than a week, Brent said. When he asked Rick about it, Rick simply replied, "VIP, commercial, stay away from it." This was just one of many examples of how valuable items were handled in secret and away from public view. Brent also noticed a strange pattern in which several women regularly appeared at the store, but they were not customers. They did not come to buy or sell items and always entered the store through the back entrance, escorted by Chumley or a man Brent only knew as Kevin. These women were never introduced to the other employees and often appeared frightened, sometimes crying or wearing ill-fitting clothes. Brent tried to talk to one of them, but Chumley warned him not to interfere and to just focus on his work. These details only reinforced the suspicion that Rick and Chumley were conducting a criminal operation. One image remains etched in Brent's memory. A young woman just out of the store staggering down the hallway late one night after work. She appeared disoriented, with visible bruises on her body and wrists. Brent, who was alone at the time, tried to help her for hours, but before long, Rick appeared out of nowhere. He put his hand on Brent's shoulder and said simply, coldly, "I didn't see anything." The words were not only a warning, but also carried a distinctly menacing undertone. From that moment on, Brent began to record all the events that were not recorded in the store's computer systems. This information never appeared in official records, but was kept in a handwritten diary that he kept hidden in a locker at a nearby gym. The diary became Brent's only place to store important details: names, dates, license plates, cash, and other unforgettable information. He wasn't sure why he wrote all this down. Maybe it was because he didn't have complete confidence in his memory, but maybe it was because he hoped he would never have to use it. Years later, when the FBI raided the store, investigators contacted Brent. They asked if he wanted to come forward, and Brent said he had been waiting for that call for a long time. He had been preparing for this day, and when he went to trial, he provided crucial evidence. Investigators confirmed that many of the names and details in Brent's diary matched the entries in Rick and Chumley's encrypted files. The vehicles Brent listed involved real estate, websites used to traffic victims, cash moved through international transactions, and one name in particular was listed on a page dated July 11th, 2020. The girl was Leah, with red hair and a look of fear in her eyes. "That was the last time I saw her," Brent told the court. Brent also spoke of another employee, Tanya, who worked in accounting. Tanya began asking too many questions about missing receipts and unusual expenses, which led to her being fired within a week without any explanation. "I think she knew," Brent said, "but she was scared, like all of us. He described the pawn shop as a tightly controlled environment where every employee's movement was monitored by security cameras. Every employee must adhere to strict access codes and confidentiality agreements, all meticulously arranged and discreet, as if everything in the store were just a stage set up to conceal the dark activities behind. Rick not only controlled what people saw, but also what they were allowed to ask. Brent recalls that, working at the store, you quickly realized that the job was not just about selling antiques, but also about keeping quiet and smiling. Rick's store, along with the television shows it appeared on, had built a false image that most people never realized. Independent contractors were brought in to film the staged segments, but they had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes. Their job was to create an atmosphere of fun, lightness, and entertainment, when the reality behind it was a completely different story. Brent goes on to describe how the fake business was systematically organized. Rick's Chumley's Candy Store, part of a pawn empire, even hosted short-term antique collecting seminars. However, Brent alleges that these seminars were actually just a front to hide money laundering activities, to distract the public from the shiny, new products they displayed. The most terrifying part of Brent's testimony was the monthly cleaning process. Rick would show up and say, "It's time to refresh." Signal files would be deleted, items moved, hard drives replaced, cameras wiped, and door locks changed. These resets were not just to erase digital traces, but also to prepare for new operations without leaving any traces. However, the most impactful part of Brent's testimony was when he shared, "I stayed silent because I was afraid. I saw people disappear. I saw girls cry. I saw the truth buried under the veneer of reality TV, and I let it happen." His voice choked up and he continued, "I thought someone else would come forward, someone more powerful, someone less afraid. But no one did." As Brent stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused before continuing. What Brent had revealed, along with the evidence that tied together the details from the girls who came in through the back door to the cash that never appeared on the books, exposed a criminal empire masquerading as a popular television show. And for the first time, the term pawn star took on a whole new meaning, a terrifying one. According to Brent's testimony and subsequent evidence, these women were not just treated as commodities, but were bought and sold. The television show was just a cover for the crimes they committed. Brent's story has exposed a horrifying truth that will make it impossible for anyone to look at Pawn Stars or this show in the same way again. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like and share it with your friends and family so they can discover it too. Leave a comment below to let us know what you think of these shocking revelations. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more exciting and surprising stories in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Frank Fritz. The name has become synonymous with the journeys of hunting for unique antiques and forgotten treasures. But behind the image of a rustic man passionate about old items is a story that has never been told, until the door of his villa was opened. Seemingly harmless items, rooms sealed for many years, and then a discovery that left everyone speechless. No one could have guessed that hidden deep in the dust of time was a secret that could completely change the way people looked at Frank, not only as a collector, but also as a person with many things that have not been revealed. Are you ready to step through that threshold? What you find inside will make you unable to take your eyes off. When Frank Fritz was found lying motionless on his bathroom floor, no one could have imagined the shocking secrets that awaited him behind the old garage door. What seemed like a time-worn space was actually a treasure trove, more than 75 vintage motorcycles, including a 1947 Indian Chief prototype valued at $250,000. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden inside was the legendary Aerosmith's Lost Tour Bus and a rare Star Wars prototype of Yoda, an item that George Lucas himself believed was lost forever. However, the biggest shock comes not from those million-dollar antiques, but from the dusty, handwritten diaries, recording the final thoughts, hidden pains, and never-before-revealed truths about Frank Fritz's life behind the spotlight. Are you ready to step into an untold story? If you have ever loved Frank, leave the number 1 in the comments section. If you have a different perspective, type the number 0. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming surprising revelations. Climax music. Many people have never owned large assets, and therefore they never consider money important. They don't care about other people's wealth, simply because they have never placed value on material things. Frank Fritz is one of them, but what makes people stunned is not his indifference to money, but the treasure he left behind in silence. More than 75 vintage motorcycles, a rare original 1947 Indian Chief, the bus that once accompanied Aerosmith, and the Yoda prototype that seemed lost to film history. But these relics are not the most profound revelations. The hand-scrawled diaries tell a haunting story: loneliness, betrayal, and the real reason Frank suddenly disappeared from the American picker show he was once the soul of. And more importantly, who was behind the plot to seize the more than $6 million fortune he left behind. Frank Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1963. From an early age, he was different. While other kids were busy playing baseball and riding bicycles, Frank spent his time collecting rocks, coins, stamps, and old beer cans. To his parents, Bill and Susan, it was just a strange hobby of a child. But for Frank, every old item told a story, carrying an invisible value that others could not see. He even collected paper clips in his notebooks, a small detail that clearly showed his rare ability to see value where others only saw trash. Frank even had a strange passion for razor blades, something that was considered eccentric at the time but is now seen as the first sign of his penchant for hunting for treasures in the dark. And perhaps it was this special ability that took Frank further than anyone could have imagined, so that when he passed away, what remained was not just old items, but a whole legend about a man who saw value in forgotten things. As an adult, Frank attended Sudalo High School, then continued on to Bettendorf, where fate brought him to Mike Wolfe, who would later become his indispensable companion on television treasure hunts. Since 8th grade, the two teenagers became close, bonding over weekends spent wandering around backyards and flea markets, hunting for dusty old items. For them, it was more than just a hobby. It was a journey to discover the forgotten stories behind each seemingly worthless item. Although many teachers believed that Frank had the qualities to pursue higher education, he chose a path few would dare to take, skipping the classroom to listen to the lessons of life itself. For Frank, true value lies not in books, but in touching time through antiques that have witnessed the world's many changes. After graduating, Frank began working as a fire inspector, overseeing fire safety in a large area of Iowa. He held that position for nearly 25 years, a long time, all the while keeping his passion for antiques alive. As a teenager, Frank began collecting motorcycles. At 16, he spent his entire life savings on a 1964 Harley-Davidson for more than $4,000, a considerable sum at the time. His family was stunned, but Frank knew what he was doing. To him, the bike was more than a vehicle. It was a living piece of history, a symbol of a time that could never be recreated. He worked hard at companies like Quad City Automatic Sprinkler and Coast to Coast Hardware to support this passion. Over time, Frank built up a collection of more than 100 vintage motorcycles, carefully stored in a specially designed barn. He attended the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota every year, the largest gathering of bikers in the country, and had long been respected by the community, even before he appeared on television. What made Frank special was not the number of items he owned, but the way he saw them. He had a rare ability, a picker's eye, that allowed him to recognize the value of objects that others often overlooked. During his years of searching, Frank entered countless dusty barns, meticulously recording each item, its origin, and the story behind it. He was more than a collector. He was a keeper of memories, a storyteller through seemingly lifeless objects. Even in his work as a fire inspector, that passion remains alive. Many of the old buildings he inspects have yielded surprising discoveries, from antique fire helmets to mechanical fire alarms to old firefighting equipment. To Frank, they are not obsolete objects, but pieces of history, relics of a bygone era that he is responsible for preserving and honoring. For Frank, each building inspection is more than a job. It's a journey of discovery. Behind the reports and strict fire safety regulations lie countless historical relics waiting to be revealed. Two seemingly contradictory roles, a serious inspector by day and an antiques enthusiast by day, have merged, creating a man with a keen eye and a unique instinct for discovery. The inspection job is where Frank honed his superior observation skills. Every scratch on a handrail, every cracked brick and thick layer of dust on the ceiling are clues to the passage of time. He learned to read a building as if it were an old diary, each detail revealing a story. This skill not only helps him in his work, but also becomes a powerful tool in his quest to find forgotten items, from damp warehouses to cluttered junk shops. Frank doesn't rely on luck. He's strategic, he's systematic. Years of painstakingly examining every detail of buildings have trained him to see value that others easily overlook. Where others see a pile of junk, Frank sees hidden opportunities in the past. It's this perspective that has made him an irreplaceable soul on the show American Pickers. A surprising turning point came when he bought a seemingly worthless item for just $15 and sold it for $475. But what Frank remembers most is not the profit, but the moment he realized his passion was more than just a hobby. It was a life skill, an understanding that could create real value. A new door opened. Collecting was no longer just a hobby, but a serious and promising path. In 2002, Frank made a big decision. He left his stable job as a fire inspector to open his own shop, Frank's Finds, in the small town of Savannah, Illinois. But the shop was unlike any other. It was like a living museum, a place that kept the souls of objects that had been forgotten by time. Located in a former opera house with a quaint bar, the shop was a window into the past. Some might call it cluttered or outdated, but to Frank, it was the original beauty, raw, genuine, and inimitable. Each item had its own story and was placed there as if waiting for someone to listen. Over the years, Frank's Finds has become a popular destination for serious collectors and casual visitors alike. Not everyone understands the eccentric arrangements, but those who look beyond the surface will see the passion, vision, and belief that Frank has put into each item. It was from this special place that the television opportunity came knocking. But Frank didn't have to try to be anything. He just had to be himself. A man who sees beauty in what others throw away, who believes that every item, no matter how old or dusty, has a story that deserves to be preserved and told. Before American Pickers became a television phenomenon, Mike Wolfe traveled across America alone with an old camcorder in hand, tirelessly documenting his quest for lost treasures. Around 2002, while Mike was still dreaming of a TV show, his longtime friend Frank Fritz chose a different path. He quit his stable job as a fire inspector and opened an antique shop called Frank's Finds in the small town of Savannah, Illinois. Frank was content with a quiet life surrounded by old things, from vintage motorcycles, rusty oil cans, to toys that bore the imprint of a bygone era. To him, it was not just a shop, but a miniature world where everything had a story waiting to be told. Mike had a bigger dream. He believed their treasure hunts could be made into a compelling television journey, where each item was brought back to life, each person celebrated. But Frank hesitated. For him, the antique shop was a safe haven, a private corner undisturbed by the spotlight. Then came a moment that changed everything. Frank bought a pin from some students for $115 and sold it for $1,450. More than just a successful sale, it was a moment that awakened an indescribable excitement within him. Frank once compared it to winning big on the poker table, thrilling, intense, and mesmerizing. Combined with Mike's persistence, Frank finally agreed. He closed the shop, packed up a few familiar items, and set off with Mike. 2 friends, a truck, and a passion for uncovering the past. The first clips, though rough, were genuine, and it was this sincerity that won over the producers. By January 2010, American Pickers was officially released. Everything changed quickly. Frank, the quiet man, suddenly became a familiar face to millions of viewers every week. The first episode attracted more than 3 million viewers, one of the most impressive debuts in History Channel history. With his signature bushy beard, sturdy body, and calm demeanor, Frank was the perfect counterpoint to Mike, tall, vibrant, and always full of energy. It was this contrast that made viewers love them as a perfect complement. From unknowns, they became icons. In October of that year, when they visited the California Surf Museum, they were surprised to find a crowd of fans waiting. "What are all these people doing here?" Frank asked in surprise. Despite his surprise, he patiently signed autographs for each person until the line was empty. In just 8 months since the show aired, one episode had attracted 5.3 million views. Frank was officially a star. They traveled as before. No script, no detailed itinerary, just their truck, some basic tools, and a never-ending passion for exploration. First a white Mercedes Sprinter, then a Ford Transit, but the spirit remained the same. In September 2011, while traveling through southern Maine, they stopped by Champion Auto in Arundel. The owner, Mario Burnett, was stunned to see the 2 TV stars standing in the middle of his yard. Frank was immediately fascinated by the old signs, rusty oil cans, and gas station souvenirs. Mike was drawn to the motorcycle gear. They stayed there for 5 days, no script, no setup, just following their intuition and the untold stories. And that's what makes American Pickers so special. 2 close friends, a truck traveling across America, not only to find valuable items, but more importantly, to revive memories, listen to everyday stories, and celebrate the beauty of things that seem to have been forgotten. Mike is obsessed with vintage bikes and old Volkswagens, while Frank has a deep love for vintage toys, rusty oil cans, and other motorcycle culture memorabilia. As the 2 explore Mario's home in Maine, their differences become more apparent than ever. Mike is drawn to protective gear for motorcycles, while Frank is almost mesmerized by the old gas station signs. Yet it's precisely this contrast that makes them work together like 2 perfect pieces, complementing and complementing each other in every scene. Mike once described Frank as a dreamer, thoughtful, funny, and emotional. Audiences sense that too and are captivated by the contrasting yet compatible chemistry between the 2. Some love Frank's calm, mature demeanor. Others are drawn to Mike's vibrant, decisive energy. That balance is what makes the show so friendly, approachable, and relatable to viewers of all ages. Frank's passion for motorcycles began in his teenage years when he took the plunge and bought his first 1964 Harley-Davidson, a decision that worried his family, but which was the beginning of a lifelong love affair. Over the years, Frank has accumulated about 35 classic bikes, which are kept in a warehouse that many people consider a living museum. His collection includes many rare models such as Indian, Vincent, BSA, Triumph, and especially the Von Dutch XAV-W, a 1942 Harley with a Volkswagen-engined frame painted by legendary artist Von Dutch himself. Frank had only seen the bike in magazine photos, and the feeling of encountering it in real life was a shock of excitement, like finding treasure in the rubble. For Frank, every bike has a soul, a story waiting to be told. In 2013, he channeled that passion into his book, How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles. The book is less a hard and fast guide and more a conversational one, packed with practical advice, interesting stories, and photos from Frank's own experiences, from spotting bargains, negotiating effectively, to seeing hidden value in seemingly worthless items. Before he became famous, Frank worked as a fire inspector for 25 years. That job gave him access to spaces that not many collectors get to visit, from old fire stations and outdated firefighting equipment to leather helmets and bronze fire extinguishers. He collects everything, turning each work trip into a journey to preserve a piece of firefighting history. In the program, every time he encounters an item that reminds him of his old profession, Frank's eyes light up, as if he is reuniting with a familiar memory. Frank doesn't just see the object, he sees the time, the people, and the emotions behind it. On his journey with the program, he often spends more time talking to the sellers, listening to the story behind the item rather than focusing on the price. He especially cherishes war memorabilia. If he comes across items that once belonged to those who sacrificed their lives, Frank is willing to give them back to museums, because for him, there are values that cannot be bought or sold. They can only be preserved and expressed with gratitude. That is Frank, a man who sees more than the material value in old things. For him, each item contains a slice of history, a story that needs to be heard and cherished. Frank is not only a collector, but also a keeper of memories, a romantic living in a world that is increasingly hastily forgetting the past. However, behind the spotlight of American pickers, Frank Fritz has had to silently fight a personal battle that not everyone knows about. For more than 3 decades, he has lived with Crohn's disease, a chronic, persistent, and painful disease that makes every trip and every filming a physical and mental challenge. His close friends say that Frank began suffering from this disease when he was about 25 or 30 years old. However, he still appears on television with his familiar smile and charm, hiding his long-lasting pain in silence. Life only began to improve when Frank decided to quit drinking, get sober, and take his health more seriously. But years of stress, illness, and constant scrutiny began to eat away at him. In 2017, an incident revealed Frank's stressful life. He was pulled over by police for driving the wrong way, and after being checked, they discovered he had been drinking and taking anti-anxiety medication. Frank admitted that the constant staring and judgment had left him in a constant state of anxiety. Although he avoided jail, his public image was tarnished. Behind the familiar TV image was a man scarred, both physically and mentally. The price of fame was not only pressure, but also isolation. The relationship between Frank and Mike Wolfe, his longtime companion on the show, was not immune to the effects. By 2021, Frank shared that the two had not spoken for 2 years. What hurt him most was not being kicked off the show, but the silence, especially after Mike's back surgery, when he never called to check on him. Frank felt like he was just a shadow next to a star that the show had always favored. Even when Mike posted a message sharing about Frank's health, he was skeptical. Deep down, he didn't believe that Mike would genuinely say nice things about him. However, in May 2023, on Memorial Day weekend, thanks to the help of a mutual friend, they had the chance to meet again. It was an emotional reunion, even though the past still had unhealed wounds. However, the tragedy did not stop there. During the pandemic, Frank injured his back while moving heavy objects at home. The necessary surgery fell right in the middle of the lockdown, leaving him completely isolated. That was when Frank began to rely on painkillers. At first, it was just to control the physical pain, but gradually he was caught in a spiral of addiction. Mike Wolfe later described watching Frank during that period as watching a storm slowly take a person away. Although friends tried to intervene, holding a talk to convince Frank to go to rehab, he still insisted that he was fine, while on the inside, he was falling apart. When the show wanted Frank to return, it was on the condition that he pass a drug test, but Frank couldn't. That was the final blow, ending his journey on American Pickers. Frank's final episode aired in March 2020. Initially, everyone thought he was just taking a break to recover from back surgery. Frank even said he never officially left. He just needed time off. But then the pandemic hit, and everything changed. Can you feel the loneliness and pressure that Frank felt? Share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue following true, emotional, and humane stories like this. In July 2021, Mike Wolfe officially confirmed that Frank Fritz would not be returning to American Pickers. In a brief message, Mike wished Frank well, but behind that brief message was a long, painful, and complicated story. Before leaving the show, Frank had undergone major back surgery that required 185 stitches and 2 metal rods inserted into his spine. Although he claimed he had recovered and was ready to return, the network chose a different path. The cold shoulder left Frank feeling abandoned, and his spirit began to deteriorate. From there, his physical and mental health only worsened. The real tragedy struck on the morning of July 14, 2022, when a friend visited Frank's farm in Iowa and found him lying lifeless on the floor. He was speechless and unresponsive. A massive stroke had taken the once vigorous man to the ground. Frank, then 59, was rushed to the hospital, but the damage to his brain was so extensive that he lost much of his ability to move and think. After a month of intensive care, he was transferred to a nursing home to begin a difficult and painful journey of recovery. Even after he returned home, Frank needed 24/7 care. His unstable health led to multiple hospitalizations, including one for severe pneumonia. It gradually became clear that Frank was no longer able to manage his own life or finances. The once independent and strong man was now completely dependent on others for help, a grim reality that no one could have predicted when they saw him on television all those years ago. In August 2022, the court intervened and appointed close friend Chris Davis as guardian to represent Frank in his personal decisions. At the same time, a bank was appointed to manage his assets, then estimated at $6 million. Court documents stated that Frank was no longer able to care for himself, unable to ensure basic needs such as food, shelter, or medical services. Without protection, his life could be in serious danger. With medical expenses approaching $30,000 per month, more than $350,000 per year, even a large amount of savings could not last forever. Meanwhile, income from investments was only about $60,000 per year, far from enough to cover the specialized nursing services, assistive medical equipment, physical therapy, and treatment for chronic conditions such as Crohn's and COPD that he faced. Close friend Jerry Jandro revealed that there had been talk of auctioning off Frank's precious collection of antiques after his death. Jerry believed that the community that loved Frank would be willing to come forward to honor a man who had given so quietly and so inspiringly. Frank's condition continued to deteriorate. Jerry heartbreakingly recounted that each time he visited him, he watched a part of him slowly crumble away. One side of Frank's body was almost completely paralyzed. He would try to lift his arm, but it just fell, Jerry recalled, choking back tears. It was the image of a warrior who had fought in silence, and now suffering the most severe consequences of a troubled life. The most heartbreaking thing was that Frank was fully aware of the tragedy that was happening to him. He knew he was so broken that he could no longer talk like he used to, could no longer move, and could no longer change his fate. His close friend Jerry believed that Frank had lost the fighting spirit inside. "When people get tired, they often give up," he said. "I believe that if Frank hadn't given up, he would have lived longer," Jerry shared with regret. Then the fateful call came on September 30th, 2024. Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime co-star on American Pickers, was informed that Frank's condition was rapidly deteriorating. Without hesitation, Mike rushed to Frank's bedside. He stayed by Frank's side for an hour, holding his hand, rubbing his chest, and whispering words of love. It was a final moment of comfort, an emotional farewell between two friends who had written a part of television history together. "I told him I wasn't mad anymore," Mike recalled. "I told him I loved him." And before Frank took his last breath, Mike whispered a final message. "Go find your mother. Go to her." At 8:50 p.m., Frank passed away peacefully. Mike was there, holding his best friend's hand until the very end. Frank's mother and her best friend, Annette Overberlander, were also present. Annette later revealed that Mike never left Frank's side during that painful journey. He was by his side just as they had hoped, to the very end. After Frank passed away in September 2024, no one expected that behind the doors of the old barn where he lived was a surprising treasure. Hidden away for years, Frank's motorcycle collection stunned collectors. More than 75 classic motorcycles, each with a story and a piece of history, sit quietly, waiting to be discovered. Some look as if they just left the factory, while others are dusty and rusty, waiting for a chance to be resurrected. The oldest bike in the collection dates back to 1912, and many are rare prototypes that experts thought were lost forever. The true extent of the collection was largely unknown except for a few of Frank's closest friends. But as word spread, collectors and museums took notice. Some experts say it could be one of the most important finds in the field of classic motorcycles in decades. One of the standouts is a 1922 Ace 4, which Frank bought for $45,000 in a famous episode. Since then, its value has skyrocketed to nearly $200,000. There's also a 1939 Indian 4, dubbed the Aristocrat, worth more than $115,000. Frank also owns several pre-war Indian Scouts, including a 1928 with its original paint intact. 3. 1950. Harley-Davidson panheads, each in various stages of restoration, are also in the collection. But the most astonishing find is a unique 1947 Indian Chief prototype. Its design has never been documented before, and experts estimate its value could exceed $250,000. Frank's collection goes beyond motorcycles, with many other rare antiques still undiscovered. What he leaves behind is more than just material possessions. It's the legacy of a lifetime of passion, quiet and cherished. In addition to the motorcycles, Frank left behind dozens of handwritten diaries, carefully preserved for more than 3 decades. In each page, he meticulously recorded his search, the origin of each bike, who the previous owner was, and the parts he had to painstakingly hunt down. There are passages where he describes the long hours in the workshop, the difficulties of restoration, and the satisfaction when the bike finally starts. Occasionally, Frank includes emotional notes about a particular trip or the memories it evokes. It is these diaries that have transformed Frank's motorcycle collection from antiques to a living heritage, increasing the value of each bike many times over. According to experts, the entire collection could be worth over $2 million, possibly even reaching $3 million if put up for auction, especially when accompanied by the name of Frank, the man who breathed life into each item. Auction houses were quick to show interest, not just for the value of the item, but for the rare opportunity to own a piece of American history, preserved by someone with heart and vision. The collection has become a symbol of passion and dedication, reflecting the deep mark Frank has left on the collecting world. Frank's love of history doesn't stop at motorcycles. Hidden away on the estate is an old truck that, at first glance, doesn't look like much, but it was the one Aerosmith used in their early days, traveling from stage to stage. Frank and Mike Wolf found the truck in a Massachusetts forest in 2018, bought it for $25,000, and had it completely restored. When it was brought back in front of the band in 2019, the emotion was overwhelming. Joe Perry couldn't believe his eyes, while Ray Tabineau, one of the founding members, choked up as he recalled the days when the group struggled to scrape together money for gas and tolls. That car wasn't just carrying musical instruments, it was also carrying ambitions and dreams. And Frank's collection included many unusual but valuable items. One of the most notable was a giant elephant head that Frank bought for $9,500 from a taxidermist collector. The item was later traded by Jack White, a member of the White Stripes, for cash and some antiques, partly because it reminded him of his famous Elephant album. The transaction was controversial in the animal rights community, but it also showed Frank's boldness and uniqueness in the world of collecting. He was never afraid of odd or out-of-the-norm items. On the contrary, he cherished objects that told a story. The more unique, the more attractive to him. Another interesting example is the original jelly cart from the early 20th century, which was used to promote a popular dessert in small towns. Over the years, the cart was donated to a museum to be preserved as a piece of American cultural heritage. Frank also has a passion for science fiction artifacts, strange, sometimes almost surreal items that all have one thing in common. They carry the spirit of the past, and Frank has always been a person who can see it when others do not. He is a collector in the truest sense, not just a collector of material things, but also a preserver of stories, memories, and slices of American history. In a special episode of American Pickers, Frank and Mike accidentally discovered 4 original Yoda prototypes from Star Wars. They were initially just fan art, but when a former Lucasfilm artist confirmed them, everything changed. Frank's ability to uncover forgotten treasures is truly unique and unmatched. These Yoda prototypes were created based on the original design from 1978 and are shaped like Albert Einstein. Frank was lucky enough to get them for a very reasonable price, and each one eventually sold for over $6,000. This proves that Frank's passion for motorcycles and signs extends beyond just pop culture, where he sees the special value of memorabilia from American music and film history. But as the public was celebrating Frank's legacy, a heartbreaking legal battle erupted. In February 2025, Frank's father, William Bill Fritz, filed a lawsuit, alleging that the will filed in 2023 was a forgery. Bill claimed that Frank never signed the will and that his $6 million estate had been left to friends and caretakers while he was not named. Bill argued that he was the only living relative left and deserved the entire estate. The legal battle quickly became a major controversy, overshadowing Frank's accomplishments. The court ordered a jury trial to clarify the issues. A judge had previously declared Frank incapable of making his own decisions after a severe stroke in 2022, and this was central to Bill's argument. He argued that if Frank couldn't take care of himself, how could he sign a valid will? Adding to the tension, Bill also claimed that he was kept away from his son in his later years, despite the precious moments they shared, like fishing trips together. The case has turned into a tense situation, with the court having to decide what is the truth. However, one thing has remained the same. Frank left the world with more than just antiques and motorcycles. He created a strong legacy, built on passion, precious memories, and a love of history. Seemingly worthless objects contain vivid stories. Now, the world is starting to recognize the value that Frank brought to the art of collecting, as well as the unique perspective he developed throughout his life. What do you think of Frank's legacy and the incredible items in his collection? What do you think about his life and passion for collecting? Share your opinion in the comments section with number 1 if you agree with Frank, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next interesting videos. See you in the next video. Today we will explore a story that has shocked many people. Rick Harrison, once known as a symbol of American humor, trustworthiness, and success, is now facing serious charges in federal court. From a TV star loved by millions of viewers, Rick suddenly appeared in handcuffs, prosecuted in connection with a series of shocking crimes, from money laundering, illegal detention, to participating in an organized crime ring that spanned the international scope. What makes the public wonder is, how could someone who was once considered a familiar face, close to the audience for many years, be involved in such cruel and dangerous acts? What lies behind the friendly facade and successful image? What hidden corners have been hidden for so long? Join us as we delve into this shocking case to find out the truth behind one of American television's most surprising falls. In the early morning of April 13, 2025, Las Vegas was still bright and bustling with casinos, lavish shows, and endless crowds. But inside the Clark County Courthouse, the atmosphere was the complete opposite: heavy, tense, and filled with suspense. Dozens of reporters, media cameras, and a curious crowd crowded in silence, waiting for a trial unlike any before. Rick Harrison, once a familiar face on American television, was brought to the dock. The man once praised for his intelligence, wit, and charisma now appeared with his head bowed, his hands cuffed, without a word of defense. The confident, decisive image once associated with him in the public's mind was now reduced to a dazed, exhausted look. In a packed courtroom, the judge began reading the nearly 200-page indictment, a litany of serious crimes that left the courtroom speechless: human trafficking, false imprisonment, money laundering, organized abuse, and running a global criminal network. According to the prosecution, Rick was not just a player. He was the mastermind, the architect, and the operator of the entire system. The superficial activities of the adult entertainment stores and the financial transactions at the casinos were just a cover for a sophisticated network built to profit from human suffering. For nearly 5 years, the system had operated smoothly under Rick's direct supervision. The evidence came one by one: security cameras, handwritten documents, encrypted emails, and heartbreaking testimony from victims, all of which gradually painted a grim picture of a well-coordinated and cold-blooded organization. The more evidence was revealed, the harder it was for the public to accept the truth, that a former television icon could be behind such a ruthless organization. And then the fateful moment came, when the judge announced the verdict. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Rick Harrison was officially sentenced to death. No reaction, no tears, no pleas, only closed eyes as if he had predicted this day. A heartbreaking cry rang out from the audience. It was a mother who had lost her daughter in mystery for many years. The atmosphere was stifling, as if it contained all the resentment and anger that had been pent up for too long. Outside the court, the crowd held banners calling for justice, while international media outlets quickly reported the news. CNN, BBC, Reuters all updated every detail of this shocking event. In less than a day, the hashtag #RickHarrison death penalty has attracted millions of social media discussions, spreading across the globe. From a beloved television icon, Rick Harrison is now at the center of one of the most shocking cases in the history of the entertainment industry. A story that makes the whole world look back at the dark side of fame, where the halo can obscure the most terrifying truths. While some fans still cling to the belief that it was all a misunderstanding, anti-trafficking organizations are adamant. This is the beginning of a journey to expose a crime that has been going on in the shadows. What motivated prosecutors to pursue the harshest punishment was not just the sheer scale of the crime, but the sophistication and ruthlessness with which Rick Harrison designed and ran a years-long system of exploitation. Every transaction was encrypted, every victim was turned into an anonymous code, and any trace that could have given away the secret was erased. There was no room for chance. It was all calculated with cold, chilling precision. In the words of a senior FBI investigator, this wasn't a mistake. This was an empire perfectly disguised as a television show. The first trial was not simply a trial of an individual, but a key that opened the door to a series of dark events behind the lights of Las Vegas. Rick Harrison was just the face on the surface. Behind him was a sophisticated machine with hidden characters, people who never appeared on screen but who protected and maintained the existence of a fierce underground world. That empire was built not only with money, but with the pain and silence of hundreds of people who were turned into commodities. Rick Harrison, the man who inspired millions of Americans with his story of rising from nothing, was once the embodiment of the American dream. Starting out in a small shop run by his father, Rick impressed with his intelligence and sharp negotiating skills. The program Porn Stars not only brought him to millions of viewers, but also turned him into a pop culture phenomenon. Rick's witty haggling, rare antiques, and tough-talking voice have been etched into the public's memory for nearly 15 years on the air. But while the TV spotlight was shining brightly, A criminal network was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. It was no longer a world of antiques and rare paintings, but of cold discussions about human fate. By 2009, when the show went on air and viewership spiked, the small shop in a sleepy residential area had become a magnet for customers and revenue. Rick became a symbol of success, making media appearances, signing books, giving speeches, and becoming the face of the entire city of Las Vegas. But that fame provided the perfect mask for the horrors that lay behind it. Rick wasn't just running a business. He was hiding a criminal network that ran like a Swiss watch. From shell companies to anonymous accounts, everything is designed to legitimize the profits from exploiting people as commodities. And the truth is only the beginning. The secrets that lie beneath the cover may reveal more names, more pieces parts of a giant machine that few could ever imagine could exist in the heart of America's most famous entertainment city. Investigative records reveal that between 2016 and 2022, Rick Harrison was behind or controlled at least 6 shell companies, all of which were opaque, with no websites, no visible offices, and no formal employees. Yet each company received money from mysterious partners in Serbia, the UAE, Thailand, and Romania through a complex, multi-layered, and difficult-to-trace money transfer network. The network only began to unravel when the FBI launched an undercover operation called Pale Porn in late 2021. The clue came from a shipping document bearing the name RH Acquisitions LLC, a document found in the files of a house where a trafficking victim had been held. The document, dated 1974, referred to the shipment of rare items, which at first glance sounded like antiques. But according to a survivor, the phrase was just code, a reference to the people themselves who were being trafficked like merchandise. From there, the FBI began to track down each link. They combed through thousands of financial records, tracked the money, planted people in the network, and inspected every gas station and every small exchange. The reconstruction revealed a meticulous system, with Rick's porn shop at the center. Not just a front, but a key transit point for a large-scale money laundering operation. A former FBI agent who had worked on human trafficking investigations along the Mexican border testified that what made Rick's network so dangerous was not just its size, but its elaborate legitimacy. Using his television fame, Rick turned shady deals into seemingly harmless ones. For example, an $83,000 shipping contract for a 19th century African mask, an item that never appeared in the store's inventory, was signed with an anonymous company in Liechtenstein with no real address. Rick also took full advantage of the Las Vegas environment, where a flexible financial infrastructure allowed for quick and unobserved cash transactions. In 1 month, he showed up at 5 different casinos and made more than 40 currency exchanges, withdrawing more than $350,000, a classic but extremely effective money laundering technique. During the trial, prosecutors presented a complex financial chart with Rick Harrison at the center. The arrows represented the flow of money. The squares were shell companies. The connectors were anonymous victims. No matter how many layers the money passed through, the final destination was the jewelry store right in the middle of Las Vegas Boulevard. The brutality of the system cannot be measured in the number of victims or the money. It lies in the coldness of the organization, where people are coded, classified, priced, and traded like commodities. According to a former technician who worked at the store, Rick came in at 3 a.m. one night with a group of strangers. They brought big wooden crates through the back door. When I asked what was inside, he just said, "Don't pry into things you shouldn't know about." The friendly, humorous image of Rick Harrison on television, the father figure, the sharp negotiator, is slowly being replaced by a colder portrait. The architect of a sophisticated system of exploitation where laughter is just a mask for the dark secrets behind. The truth doesn't come with a bang. It often begins with a whisper, a forgotten detail, an unnoticed trace. For the FBI, the case didn't start with a TV show or a pawn shop. It started with a missing persons file, that of a 16-year-old girl named Jenna Morales from Reno, Nevada. Jenna wasn't a high-profile case, at least not at first. She disappeared after signing up for an online modeling program that had been advertised on social media. From the website to the social media accounts, everything was professionally designed, from the photos to the fake partners to the alluring invitations. She was promised an all-expenses-paid photo shoot in Los Angeles. She got on the last bus out of Reno, and no one has heard from Jenna since. Most such cases are buried under thousands of files. But this one small detail opened up a maze, and for the first time, light began to shine into the dark corners of an unsuspecting world. But what shocked the agents even more was not the scale of the network, but the way Rick Harrison ran it all, with a cold, calculating quality. Rick didn't say much during the encrypted calls, but each word was carefully chosen, as if he were controlling everything remotely, not as a cog, but as the brain behind the entire machine. Suspicion quickly turned to certainty when one of the agents discovered that the phone used during these calls was the same one Rick had used publicly on television. As the investigation deepened, the agents discovered a secret archive, a meticulous record of every shipment, every destination, every coded name. Some of the records involved unofficial ports and shipping routes that didn't appear on conventional maps. This network, it turned out, was not only located in Las Vegas, but also spread to other countries, operating silently but effectively, both as a place to transfer money and to hide people who were considered as commodities. A veteran agent exclaimed, "This is no longer a normal criminal group. This is a machine, and Rick Harrison is the main operator of it. No detail is left out. Everything is calculated like a closed, tactical map." With the evidence piling up, the FBI launched many raids at related locations. The result was documents clearly printed with Rick's traces, from shipping contracts, coded notes, to seemingly innocuous receipts, all showing his deep role in organizing, coordinating, and concealing unforgivable acts. Many of the documents even listed the goods being shipped, which later turned out to be young girls ranging from teens to adults, with code names, prices, and detailed routes. From the recordings, to the transaction codes, to the discovered storage facilities, every detail painted a portrait of Rick Harrison that was completely different from the cheerful, approachable image the public once knew. No longer the comedic TV dad, Rick was now seen as the designer of a giant, sophisticated machine hiding in the shadows of celebrity and legitimate business. More than 60 cases of young girls disappearing across the United States, from Nevada to Florida, from Ohio to Texas, had all been linked to the activities of RH Acquisitions, LLC. The strange records, codes, and papers that were initially thought to be a system error now became a complete piece of a dark puzzle. And at the center of it all, none other than Rick Harrison, the man who turned the pain and disappearance of dozens of victims into part of his cold and ruthless operating model. While pretending to use archaic business language, language experts confirmed that the phrases appearing in the notes were in fact near-exact copies of the terminology commonly used in international human trafficking networks. From there, a dark picture emerged. A famous television entrepreneur once associated with the negotiation of antiques was quietly operating a complex system where people were transported like commodities. It all started with a name, Jenna Morales. She might have been forgotten forever if not for a misdirected invoice with the strange note, item 1874. From that moment on, the question was no longer whether Rick was involved, but who else was behind it. How many victims were still unknown, and how the system had been able to operate so smoothly for 5 years without being detected. The most obvious answer, however, came not from interrogations or financial records. It was behind a soundproof wall in an old warehouse on East Sahara Avenue in Las Vegas. A black, leather-bound notebook, seemingly forgotten for years, was found in a narrow concrete compartment, hidden behind wood paneling and insulation. There was no lock, no storage box, just a thin layer of dust, as if it had always been waiting to be discovered. When the first page was turned, all doubts disappeared. Inside were handwritten notes in black and blue ink detailing transactions not about antiques or art, but about people. Each person was described by a code number, age, gender, nationality, personality traits, and destination. No names, no pictures, just empty numbers, 6318. Each entry was a human life. 230 entries in total, representing at least 230 victims. But what was more haunting was not the number, but the way Rick wrote it. There was no hesitation, no emotion. The lines flowed smoothly, as neatly as in an accounting book, suggesting that this was no spur-of-the-moment action. It was systematic. It was planned. It was power expressed in every stroke. The notebook was not meant to be secretive. It was like a silent declaration that Rick Harrison had never feared being discovered. Because for him, everything was so perfectly controlled. The FBI's forensics department quickly sent the notebook to the lab for analysis. The results confirmed that the handwriting in the notebook matched Rick Harrison's signature and other documents over the years. In addition, experts analyzed the pressure and stroke frequency of the handwriting, indicating that it was natural, not forced or forged. The last page of the notebook drew a detailed diagram outlining how a transnational human trafficking network operated, recruiting victims from Eastern Europe, using fake passports through Serbia, entering the United States through Canada, and finally distributing them through transit points in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. The points were coded, each courier was numbered, drop-off points were prioritized, and victims were categorized by age, health, English proficiency, and compliance. The notebook was not just a record of crimes, but a blueprint for an entire criminal empire. When the notebook was presented at trial, the prosecutor described it as irrefutable, incontrovertible, and unmistakable evidence. Each detail in the notebook silenced the courtroom, as if time had frozen. One juror could not bear it and left his seat. Another burst into tears as he read a description of a 13-year-old girl being trafficked to Asia with the chilling note, "High class, no pathology, good health." When asked about the notebook, Rick Harrison chose to remain absolutely silent. There was no denial or confession. His attorney argued that Rick may have been tricked and that the notebook may have been forged, but the evidence contradicted everything. The handwriting was verified, the locations matched GPS data and the victim's missing times, and the information in the notebook matched exactly with over 30 emails leaked from the Rare Find Logistics system, a front company Rick owned through 3 entities in the Cayman Islands. The notebook was more than physical evidence. It was the living ledger of a shadowy criminal organization, with no electronic copies, no servers, all written in blue ink as a symbol of power and control. Rick trusted his notes more than his digital security system. But this complacency became his condemnation. When the notebook was made public, the case became more than an investigation. It became a fact, etched into each yellowed page. Rick Harrison's name would no longer be associated with stores or bestsellers. Instead, it will be recorded in the federal criminal record, alongside the most vicious human traffickers in modern history. What really made this case irreversible, however, was the moral testimony from those closest to Rick. When those closest to him came forward, the truth became more than just an investigation. It was the most severe punishment for the criminal's character. In court, the fatal blows came from 2 people, Rick's son, Corey Harrison, and Austin Chumley Russell, his best friend and companion for years. When Corey entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. He was no longer the confident, witty young man the audience had come to love. Instead, he was a haggard, hollow-eyed man who walked slowly, his hands shaking as he took the stand. He was no longer Rick's son. He was the one who carried the pain and disappointment of a betrayed child. When the prosecutor asked, "Who are you?" Corey was silent for a long time, then answered with a choked voice, "I am Corey Harrison, the son of Richard Kevin Harrison." The whole courtroom fell silent. Corey recounted that from 2019, he began to notice changes in his father. Secret meetings, doors locked from the outside, something that had never happened before. One night, I went back to the store near midnight to get a computer, and I heard a baby crying from the storage room. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. The next day, I asked my dad, and he just looked at me and said, "Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to." That was the first time I was afraid of him. From then on, Corey was removed from all access, his account was deleted, and he was not allowed to enter the assessment area, which Rick had completely soundproofed. It was that exclusion that made Corey decide to stand on the side of justice. One day, Corey accidentally opened a misdirected shipment. Inside were not the usual antiques, but a box of files and photos of young girls. Each photo had an identification code and their current condition. Corey was terrified. When he confronted his father, Rick coldly said, "Close it and forget what you just saw." Those words made Corey collapse. That night, he left home, cut off contact with his father, quit the TV show, and gave up the family business. While the media reported that Corey disappeared due to work conflicts, no one knew that behind his silence was a nightmare that was tearing his mind apart day by day. At the trial, when questioned by the defense attorney whether he was making up the story because of the conflict with his father, Corey just looked at Rick, who was sitting not far away, and answered, his voice choked, "I'm not making this up. This is a nightmare that I can't erase from my mind." He continued chokingly, "I don't want to believe that the father I once respected could do these things, but he never denied it. He just kept silent, and that silence was the answer." The courtroom fell into heavy silence, while Rick just looked forward, not reacting. Unlike Corey, Austin Chumley Russell is not a family member, but he has accompanied Rick for more than 2 decades, since before the cameras appeared. On the show Pawn Stars, Chumley is funny, clumsy, and lovable. But when he steps into the courtroom, all innocence disappears. His face hardened, no longer joking. He carried the truth heavy in his heart. Chumley said that before he thought Rick's sneaky actions were just a trick to evade taxes or take advantage of legal loopholes, not thinking it was anything too serious. But since 2018, what he witnessed made him suspicious. There were nights when Rick came to the store at 2, 3 a.m. with a familiar driver and a white truck stopped at the back door. They unloaded unmarked wooden crates. Then Rick called and said something that Chumley remembered clearly. "Item 27 is in storage. Dispose of discreetly." When Chumley once jokingly asked if it was an alien artifact, Rick didn't laugh, just glared at him and said, "Don't joke about things you don't understand." Chumley said that moment made his blood run cold. Late one night in 2021, Chumley came home from work late at night and heard strange noises coming from the storage area. Banging, a baby crying. When he told Rick the next morning, he was told, "You must have misheard. If you're smart, don't ever mention it again." From that day on, Chumley lived torn between loyalty and suspicion, between happy memories and what he feared he had unwittingly helped. When the mysterious notebook was made public, recording the same codes that Rick had said over the radio, Chumley knew he couldn't keep quiet. "I used to turn a blind eye," he says, "but I can't take that guilt to the grave." Despite being attacked for his drug-related past in 2016, Chumley stood his ground. "I made a mistake, but I've never seen a human being treated like a commodity. And when I saw it, I couldn't stay silent." Despite coming from different backgrounds, Corey and Chumley both share one undeniable truth. They loved Rick Harrison, and now they are the ones who brought him to light. When the codes and notes matched what Rick had said over the radio, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't something I could ignore, and I couldn't take that silence with me to the grave. During cross-examination, the defense tried to use Chumley's drug history in 2016 to discredit him. But Chumley didn't back down. "I've made mistakes," he said, "but I've never seen anyone treated like a commodity. When I saw that, I couldn't keep quiet. Although they came from different paths, Corey and Chumley had something in common. They had once trusted Rick Harrison, and now they were the ones who dared to bring the truth about him to light. After their testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed immediately. This was no longer a simple case about money or business intrigue. It was a tragedy of betrayal. A man who had once been a father figure, a respected boss, had now quietly turned those close to him into victims of lies, fear, and silence. As the trial drew to a close, the public began to realize something bigger. Rick Harrison's actions were not just illegal, they were crimes against humanity. Then, one by one, people stood up. 7 people. And the room became a symbol of a nightmare society doesn't want to face: human trafficking. A crime so well hidden, yet the money it generates still leaves a trail, legal, clean, and seemingly untraceable. In Rick Harrison's hands, human exploitation went beyond late-night shipments and secret soundproof rooms. It became a meticulously designed, multi-layered money laundering system, cleverly disguised as a legitimate business. At the heart of the scheme was a series of shell companies, mostly registered in loosely regulated places like Nevada, Delaware, and the British Virgin Islands. Each company had a specific role: receiving money, shipping, recording expenses, and obscuring the transactions of the items. Rick's model was highly layered, making the money flow through multiple layers, obscuring the trail. A prime example was a payment of $85,000 from a European collector to Golden Ledger Holdings, one of Rick's companies. The payment was recorded as a purchase of a 19th century African tribal mask, but there was no record of its appraisal, sale, or display. After the money was received, it was routed through 2 other companies, one recorded as a storage expense, the other as a shipping expense, before being reinvested in art. Within 72 hours, the money was broken down into 5 transactions, moving through 3 banks in Cyprus, Dubai, and an unnamed country. By then, the money had become legitimate income, leaving no trace. Another method Rick used was through casinos. According to records from the Nevada Financial Controller, Rick made at least 37 high-value chip purchases over 14 months, totaling more than $350,000. The process was simple: cash in for chips, play a few low-limit games, then cash in the chips for winnings, all below the $10,000 threshold to avoid reporting. In November 2021, Rick withdrew $7,400 from 5 different ATMs each time for a total of $37,000, all below the warning threshold. But when put together, these transactions form a classic money-spattering model, similar to how drug cartels launder money. The final and most dangerous weapon is art. This has long been an area of financial control, thanks to the ambiguity of its value and lack of provenance. A painting simply labeled rare and given a rough appraisal can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In one transaction, a sketch purported to be a Picasso 1914 sold for $120,000 through an art dealer. However, upon investigation, an expert confirmed that it was simply an internet print, aged with tea stains and sandpaper. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop was more than just a pawn shop. It actually operated as a sophisticated money laundering operation. Items were shown on television, bought for astronomical prices, and then disappeared without a trace. No resale, no storage, no proper receipts. Investigators quickly realized that the items were just a front to legitimize the flow of illegal money. A $65,000 watch was actually worth less than $3,000, but it was used to transfer money to trafficking partners in Eastern Europe. The network also included real estate, where vaults and underground rooms were disguised as commercial premises. A building in Henderson was purchased for $190,000, but just 3 months later sold for $465,000 to a Malaysian company linked to a global child trafficking network. The building was never used for its intended purpose. It was simply a vehicle for phony transactions, in which real estate values were inflated to hide ill-gotten gains. What was shocking was the global interconnectedness of the network. Investigations by the Federal Tax Investigation Bureau and Interpol revealed that at least 12 countries, including Singapore, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, and the UAE, were involved in the scheme. Each country played a part, from receiving money, moving people, forging documents, to legitimizing transactions. When the money map was presented in court, a giant diagram emerged with a series of transaction codes, arrows, and dates, all leading to a single name: Rick Harrison. He was not just the initiator, but also the coordinator of the entire network, like a CEO running a system, with specialized subsidiaries, from storage, transportation, valuation, payment, to wiping the traces. The Justice Department's financial experts have confirmed that this system could not have come about by accident. It was the product of meticulous planning, exploiting legal loopholes and hiding behind a TV celebrity. Rick Harrison raised money laundering to a fine art, and behind the funny moments and humorous deals on reality TV, there was a complex criminal network, powered by silence, fame, and dirty money. 8. The trial ended. The final verdict was delivered in the crisp January air of Nevada. It had been more than 11 months since Rick Harrison was arrested. More than 10,000 pages of documents, 97 hearings, 43 witnesses, and 4 victims had been brought before the court. This trial was not about one individual. Everyone understood that Rick Harrison was the symbol of a system of open crime, where evil no longer had to hide, but was dressed in a glamorous television cover. The courtroom was silent as the judge rose. Before him was not just a sentence of a man, but a powerful statement of facts. After listing the full list of charges ranging from human trafficking, money laundering, false imprisonment, to running an organized crime organization, he announced, "Given the gravity of the offense, the number of victims, and the overwhelming evidence, the court sentenced Richard Kevin Harrison, a.k.a. Rick Harrison, to death by lethal injection." There was no applause, no cheers, only a choked sigh from the back row, where the family of one of the victims had sat, and silent tears. Rick sat silently. He did not protest, did not defend himself, did not show remorse. Perhaps he knew it was all over when the evidence was clear. His own notebook, a cell built right under his office, and a series of financial transactions bearing his name. The media broadcast the trial live as a global event. Major news outlets ran sensational headlines: TV star Rick Harrison from icon to death penalty. Outrage quickly spread across forums, social media, and political commentary programs. Criticism mounted over the leniency of society toward celebrities and the indifference of the entertainment industry to clear warning signs. The question kept ringing: how could this case have gone on for so many years without anyone noticing? Urgent hearings were held in the U.S. Congress. A group of lawmakers proposed new laws requiring expanded background checks on television companies and independent entertainment entities. At the same time, the United Nations Human Rights Council called for an international investigation into the cross-border network involved in the Rick Harrison case. What started as a simple criminal case quickly grew into a global scandal involving abuse of power, media manipulation, and commercial conspiracies. But amid all the legal, political, and institutional backlash, Rick Harrison's fans were the most pitiful victims. Not only did they lose their beloved reality TV show, they also had to face the harsh truth. Under the bright spotlight, sometimes there are dark, cruel shadows that are hard to imagine. Rick Harrison's story is more than just a star's fall. It is a warning about the power, the aura, and the terrifying silence that the media can maintain for years. Because behind every bright smile on screen, there may be a truth that has been buried for too long. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you for watching.